I'm curious, do you think the entities have a familiarity with, the teachings of Christ? Like, do you think, like, if you could ask them hypothetically, I don't even know if this is an answerable question. No, I'm curious what their perception of Christ would be.
Yeah, I do, and I think it's tied in with UFO phenomenon too. I think it's all the same thing. I think these entities are probably just a very evolved form of consciousness um, that exists all around us that likely is tied to God um, in the strict sense of the word. And again, they talk about that in the Law of One a lot, that it was the initial thought. There's an infinite creator, and that consciousness imbues everything. And it started with thought. It started with light, let there be light, which I think is, if not consciousness itself, the transmission or medium with which consciousness is exchanged.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's any coincidence that that light in my neighbor's yard was the initial point of contact, or that we have terms like enlightenment or seeking the light, or the very first thing that was written is let there be light.
Mm-hmm.
I think light is very much instrumental to all of this. And then from that grew the smaller things that cohesed into bigger things. And then you have these logoses that allow things to unfold in different ways, like you were talking about with, localized agency, free will. You create a space for these things to develop, and they develop however they're going to based on their own choice.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they talk about in that book over and over. I think you'll really enjoy it. It's just a really different perspective that has helped me a lot. But these entities are interesting with regard to the Jesus question too, because one of the first case studies in my second book, the extratempestural model, is this miner named Udo Artana. He was a Dutch or German miner that came over, working actually not far from where I live in Montana, and he came across this craft. They took him inside. They showed him everything. They taught him how it worked. He didn't really understand it all, but it involved electromagnetism and counter-rotating flywheels. And he wrote to John Glenn and explained all of this stuff because he was so struck by like how advanced it was and how he thought, this could help America if we had access to information about this technology. But I bring it up because Warren Aston, the guy who really went deep into his story, one of the things that stuck out to him the most is that he asked specifically. He was like, so do you guys believe in Jesus or, religion or whatever? And what's interesting is he said that is the one question they wouldn't answer. It's the one thing that they would not respond to him about or give him an answer to is the question of Jesus. And that, I think, speaks volumes because why? They'll show them the craft, they'll show them where they eat and poop and do everything else, but they won't answer questions about Jesus and about religion. And I can't help but wonder if a lot of things, and others have wondered this too, Diana Pasulka's written and talked about this a lot, where a lot of things that we see in these religious texts, you just did a whole damn podcast about this, with like the ways that UFOs have worked their way into
right, and how people interpret religious scripture.
Yeah, I was listening to that on the plane last night.
Oh, nice.
The one about the Ark of the Covenant, and Isaiah and Ezekiel.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because if we do take these stories literally, if we interpret the Bible literally, there's a lot of UFO shit in there.
Mm-hmm.
The way people levitate, the way there's radiation burns, the guy that got hit in the hand, I can't remember his name right now.
Mm-hmm.
The UFOs that are seeing all of this religious imagery, the star. Actually, I think you mentioned in that episode the star that led the three wise men to the manger. That's the back cover of my third book, because I think that was a UFO too. Asteroids don't do that. Stars don't do that. UFOs do that. UFOs will take you to where the next Messiah was born. So if we take that at face value, how many other things that we have put into our religious texts, not just Christianity or Judaism or Islam, but all of the other religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, all of the different Native American, indigenous belief systems, how many of those were influenced by things like that, by UFO encounters or telepathy or abductions? So Yeah, I mean I wrote my third book as fiction. It's called Revelation: The Future Human Past. I wrote it for a very specific audience. Um, but it because I can't write that as a scientific book, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I needed to write that as satire, and I needed to write it as fiction.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of stuff in there I do think is probably accurate with regard to the way UFOs may have interacted with people through time and how that may have influenced religious belief systems.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, again, looking at scripturally speaking, these ancient texts to say, that a light guided these people that, ostensibly were wise, that, some speculated they have, astronomical knowledge, that they're, stargazers perhaps, and that they see this one particular light that then leads them to the birth of the Christ.
Yeah.
Which, seems like a compelling and positive moment as it's sort of represented in the scriptures. And then for these other entities, or perhaps the same entities, to not engage with the question of Christ, I find, it's curious to me.
Yeah.
Are they, and again, there's also this question of like, are these all the same entity, right? Is it all the same force?
True. That's a really important question.
Is it possible, again, I'm always going to be seeing things through my religious upbringing. But, to say like, within the Christian tradition, there is good and there is evil, and that there are positive entities and negative entities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, possible that, the law of one and, the communication with Seth, these could be different entities. They could be, different versions of the same consciousness. Yeah. Like, I don't know if it's necessarily possible to parse what exactly it is. Was the wheel within the wheel from Ezekiel, was that angelic? And, the serpent in the garden, was that necessarily demonic? Obviously, people have disputed these things, but right. It just leads one to wonder.
And where do we draw the line between metaphor and something that actually was?
Sure, right, exactly. So I don't know. It brings up the question of like not engaging with the question makes you wonder. Okay, why?
Yeah, and to the extent like that, Jeff Kripal, who's a religious scholar, PhD, religious studies, at the first Esalen event that he invited me to, he started his little talk, like welcome everyone. It's PhDs from all these different fields, psychology, biology. But he, and I guess I thought it was interesting, but he put a slide in his welcome presentation, what I just told you, the one question they wouldn't answer was about Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And then a pause. Like, let's all stop and think about that for a second. Like, mm-hmm. This guy who studies religion and comparative studies and through time was like, wait a minute, this is really important. And the whole like welcome talk didn't really have anything to do with that, but he saw it as important enough to stick it in there and say, let's all talk about this. I agree. I think we could learn a lot from that, especially with regard to how much they might all be the same thing. Mm-hmm. Religions, belief systems, worldviews, how much they might have been shaped by these same types of interactions that we have now, these abductions, the telepathic communication, seeing lights in the sky. Was it all similar or the same, and they just developed these worldviews around it? Or was it intentional? That's the thing I struggle with. Was it intentional, some sort of catalyst to help humans sort of follow the carrot and the stick towards some other more grandiose realization later on? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Again, I don't want to overly moralize things. I think that's probably a trap that religious folks can fall into, to say like that's bad, that's good, especially if things are helping people in certain capacities, right? Like for a long time, weed was seen as satanic, but now we can kind of see it's like used medicinally to help people sleep or with chronic pain. So I want to try to steer away from that on a personal basis, but it does leave a little bit of an open-ended feeling for me to say like, the fact that specific entity, I don't want to group all type of spiritual entities.
And I wish more people were like you. The world would be a better place. There's mm-hmm. a lot of people still that just want to nounify and moralize and put into little boxes mm-hmm. all of these things and then push them aside.
Right.
Not put it in a box and hide it in your closet, mm-hmm. With your stash. That's a bad thing to do. Mm-hmm. We should be talking about all of these things and be having these conversations about ethics and morals and just intentionality and free will. And I think it's all important. But if we just put it in a box and stash it away, mm-hmm. we can't do that.